top. But the whole point is, technically, if one country goes to war, for any reason, that could mean all of Europe at war like that, like this. And if all Europe goes to war, remember we have imperialism. That means a worldwide war. Overnight. So what are we doing about it?
Oh. Switzerland, second line, right in the middle. I was thinking, for Switzerland, like.
Is that your Swiss voice? Switzerland was neutral. By the way, let me ask you a quick question. That's a very valid question. How can Switzerland maintain its neutrality in the war? Yes.
Because it's more like terrain.
Yeah, mountains. Stop. Yeah.
Is that how it's its own country? Like all
It's still more complex than that. Yeah. And Belgium, they're neutral too, but it was flat. So the Germans didn't care. Neutral doesn't give any neutral, just mean you can say you're neutral, but a country can still declare war, and then you're no longer neutral, obviously. And so, two more alliances. What country was the protector of Serbia because they hated Austria? Who was it? I heard someone say it. Russia. Russia. And the last one we have to get, this is really important. Belgium was neutral. Every great power back when Belgium was created, 1830, said that Belgium, we will defend Belgian neutrality. But one country meant it. And kind of for the same reason they joined the Triple Entente. Britain. They didn't want an enemy on these harbors either. So, write down, Britain saw themselves as the defender or ally of Belgium. So as they saw it, if Belgian neutrality was infringed, they might go to war to defend Belgium. So these are the alliances. And the thing is, you have the entire, basically, or the entire Europe on a hair trigger, ready to go to war. Ready to go to war. And all of Europe was an armed camp. The arms race, every major power with building weapons as fast as they could, especially they had the Industrial Revolution. Spain, for example, the Industrial Revolution never really hit, so they were trying, but they were literally falling apart. Italy tried, not really began the Industrial Revolution. France had industrialized, very modern. Germany, of course, Belgium. Belgium built up a big army for a little country like that. Britain built up their fleet. Russia had just begun the Industrial Revolution, so they were not near as modern, but they had a lot of people. All this arms race. But the thing is, this is the era of mass armies. Never before could armies be so big. So throughout history, you might have massive armies that in the short run, but they couldn't supply it. But now they can supply them. As populations are getting bigger, and with mass urbanization, it became easier to organize and train armies. And every nation on the continent had conscription. The United States, we call conscription the draft. And everybody followed the German model that goes back to the 1740s. The German model was this. Every young man, when they turn 19, they're in the army. They're in the standing army for a year. Now, the most talented ones, or at least the ones that seem more apt to army life, they'll recruit to become sergeants, non-commissioned officers, or in the Navy, petty officers, same kind of the base of the army of the sergeants and petty officers. But then, you're out of 20, you're in the reserves for the next 20 years. You're in the reserves for the next 20 years. So you drill once a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and you're called out in case the army needs you. So the point is, until you're 40, France will go to 45. You're in. They have you. Younger men obviously would be kind of A class, they have B class, C class in reserves. And then they had a professional military academy where they recruit young men to go become professional officers. The big thing were well-trained, well-educated staff officers to organize these now huge armies. Everybody did this. Britain did not. Britain had a territorial militia called territorials, a small standing army, very professional, but small, and then it was powerful navy. But they also looked at this run of the war. Remember, I told you everybody was scared of Armageddon. And Britain looked at Germany and said, we might have to mobilize, bring a bunch of men into the army. We need young men ready to become soldiers, especially ready to become officers. What was created in Britain? You created young and recruited as boys to become ready to become officers in case war came. It was spread to the United States too.
The Scouts, the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, Boy Scouts. But the Boy Scouts don't. They dress in uniform someday. So you have conscription and new technology of these mass armies. Oh, let me go back to 1 second. French, German, the four French in blue. French and currency. New artillery, or I'm sorry, new technology. And they bought smokeless powder. Now a rifle has a range of a mile. It's no coincidence that every major army by 1905 is going to get rid of their brightly colored uniforms. They used to have brightly colored uniforms so their generals could see which side is which on the smoky battlefield with black powder. You could see them. But now they stick out. You can be picked off half a mile away from the front. So Britain adopted khaki. Khaki's a good color. US would adopt khaki in the Philippines. The Germans adopted kind of a darkish gray, almost Allen's coat. That's almost the German uniform right there, that color. And which is good camouflage. It just kind of blends into everything. The Russians did brown, good color. The Austrians did kind of a lighter colored gray. What did the French do? Blue and red pants. Because the French were not going to hide. The French had this kind of almost cult of courage, how brave they were. Boy, the poor French soldiers. In 1916, they would finally adopt a much better uniform, light blue. They wouldn't go to khaki until the end of the war. So the new technology of artillery was the big 90% of the casualties in World War I would be by artillery. And the French made this high fire 75 millimeter cannon that could rapid fire, very accurate. But as it turned out, that's a German cannon. Here's another German. It was high explosive, heavy artillery. Became the most important weapon of war. And it still is the most important weapon. Most of the casualties in the Russian invasion of Ukraine is from artillery. Because every shell, when it explodes, obviously what's going to happen for the explosion, but what else is going to happen? Yeah, shrapnel. Shrapnel, originally they would put like little balls in the cannon and explode out, invented by a British colonel by the name of Harry Shrapnel. Was a colonel named Harry Shrapnel. But the shells have steel casing and they're designed to break up into thousands of small pieces of jagged red hot metal. That from 155 millimeter howitzer, the main howitzer the US Army uses today, it can spread about 30 yards. And that's lethal. Depends where it hit, but lethal, at least 20. It just rips bodies. It rips them apart. So artillery is the killer. That's a modern artillery. And the old artillery being other things, planes, machine guns become very important, but artillery is still the most important weapon. Not only that, railroads. The new technology of railroads will revolutionize armies. If you have a mass army now, Germany's going to be able to put 4.5 million men in uniform on August 4th, 1914. You couldn't supply them unless you have railroads. So railroads would bring out the supplies. One problem with this is these are British soldiers bringing up artillery rounds. These are Americans packed into French boxcars ready to be shipped to the Argonne. And I'm like, yay! They won't be that happy after being packed in a boxcar for a day. But if they attack, they could advance. But if they got too far from the railheads, the end of the rail line, the advance stopped. They are now tied to the railroads too. This would revolutionize war, get troops to the front, change everything. We first saw this in the Civil War, but now the railroads are even more extensive. The most extensive rail network in the world by 1914 was not the United States, it's Germany. France is pretty close, Belgium, Britain. So destroying railroads would become the art of war. We saw Sherman, I showed you the March to the Sea. That's a railroad bridge destroyed by retreating French forces. And the Germans would break up an entire system to destroy rails when they retreated in 1917 to a shorter line. The point is, railroads became everything. But the symbol of this arms race was a brand new battleship called the Dreadnought. You remember the Great White Fleet that Roosevelt sent around the world in 1907 and 1909 to show the new US power? When those ships got back in 1909, they were all obsolete because the British had built this ship, the HMS Dreadnought. And every big battleship after that until the 1920s is going to be called just simply dreadnoughts. And it revolutionized warfare, heavily armored, in some areas as much as 24 inches of steel armor, that would eventually be doubled. Faster than most ships. And instead of having a variety of guns, it had 10 11-inch guns. They could fire about 11,000 yards. Super dreadnoughts, just 5 years later, right here, are going to have 15-inch guns that can fire over the horizon. See these little right here? They had to get higher and higher so they can see to where to aim these things. Britain's going to build 35 of these, and this would become the symbol of the arms race. Only the richest and most industrially advanced countries could make dreadnoughts. Never got that? Only the richest. The United States is going to build almost a dozen. That's the New York. It's a museum. Really cool. Been on it, walked around it. It's also very claustrophobic. I don't know how those guys will deal with that. Not a cell, but pretty close. And they would become the most important weapons, and Britain is going to put so much treasure in this. They're going to double the next power. See, most of them are coal, but Britain's going to have to get a source of oil, which will lead to all kinds of problems in the Middle East. And can you see their most potent weapon? You can see it. They could fire 15,000 bombs. Just imagine the damage that could do.
Yeah, but we had a land that's
I do like it. They rarely had to fire the cats. It never came. So all of a sudden, the most industrially advanced countries could make these. Now France could make, but France committed every penny they had to their army because their population was only 60% of Germany. Russia had just begun the Industrial Revolution, couldn't really do it. And remember, they lost their whole fleet. It's the Japanese. The Ottoman Empire, too weak. Austria and Italy could make a few. Japan made a bunch. And what other country? First off, here's Puck magazine showing all the great powers gambling their new dreadnoughts. I thought that was a cool picture, but it's Germany. Germany will eventually have over half the number that Britain had. Britain still had double their number, but Germany didn't have to defend an empire all over the world. And Germany had the most powerful army in the world. And they started making these dreadnoughts. They had to be shorter range, heavily armed, all coal powered. This is something new, a reconnaissance plane. Germany started making dreadnoughts. Now, back in 1900, Britain and Germany actually had talks about forming an alliance. But once, the Kaiser, and what was the Kaiser's name of Germany? The guy with the withered left arm. Do you remember his name? Wilhelm the Second. He, jealous of England, for building a fleet, and that now directly threatens Britain. And Britain went from being kind of close to Germany. Why? Because Britain hated France. But now this became Britain's greatest fear. They don't have a large army. If Britain could dash across the channel, Britain could be taken. And that pushed Britain, the building of dreadnoughts, closer to France. That's why that's why France was able to persuade. Look at, here comes Germany. Persuade Britain to sign that entente. And that would be key. It's one of the great what ifs in history. What if Germany never built 18 dreadnoughts? World War I and our entire history would be different. I don't know how, we'd be speaking Bulgarian, that's all I know. But it was close. And it's only 20 miles. So that's Britain's greatest fear. One more thing, they spent all this wealth, and it became a major source of prestige. They had these grand reviews of their dreadnoughts. The US still called them battleships, but everyone else in the world called them dreadnoughts. Think about spending all this wealth. What if one gets sunk? Oh no, we lost everything. And what a loss of prestige. So everyone thought, who wrote the influence of sea power on world history? And said Mahan. And everybody thought Mahan. They read him. And Mahan's like going to be this one big battle. The war began. They organized, the British and Germans organized their fleet. Was there one big battle? No. In fact, there'd only be one major naval battle in World War I, 2 years into the war, right here, massive battle called Jutland. That was basically a draw. They were scared to use them. They just basically sat in the harbors and rusted. Eventually, the German Navy mutinied at the end of the war. They were so scared to use them, they didn't use them. The symbol of the war showed also the futility of the arms race. Now, this is what we call a lesson. Would there be anything like that in the United States that might show the futility of the arms race? I mean, obviously, the best example would be our nuclear weapons, which we have spent trillions of dollars to maintain. That's a lot of wealth that is going to, you're basically dumped into a silo or into a submarine. And we're never gonna use these. All that training, the best case scenario is we get rid of them. Best case scenario. The second best case scenario, they just sit there and waste money. Because obviously the worst case scenario, boom. Like that, that's called sound effects. But we have made weapons that we're afraid to use because they're so expensive and they're kind of unreliable. And there's a lot of prestige involved. Have you ever heard of the B-2 stealth bomber? We would never use those in a situation where you might actually get shot down. $400 million a piece, and they have a tendency to crash. Basically, the only thing they use them for is really expensive flyovers of stadium for football games. It's the only thing I can really see. And the F-35 fighter, $300 million a piece for a plane that costs something like $12 million a day to maintain. That's more than I'm making a year. Yeah, so we're afraid to use these. Similar things happen. Right here. Good luck. So what we have here, though, is a war is coming, and AKA bear versus man fighting. Who here would really love the bear to not be muzzled and just take it? Yeah, I'm all for the bear. A battle is coming. So, sticking with this in mobilization. This would become a word that everybody would talk about. And it's a relatively new word in this context. It's mobilization. So every country has their standing army. That means that men that are currently in uniform, standing army and somebody else, the reserves. Remember, the reserves are farmers or clerks or mechanics or factory workers, whatever they might be, back in their villages or cities. They're back there. So mobilization is your standing army, which in Germany is about 1.2 million. And look how many men they put in uniform. 4.5 million men. France, 60% of the population. The effort France made in this war is just kind of amazing. They would win, just barely. But mobilization is calling out the reserves, but it's so much more than that. And so that means mustering them out, getting them to train stations, and getting them to the frontier to fight. That is mobilization. Calling out the reserves, but more. And think about this. It's not an easy thing. That's 3.5 million men you're calling out from Germany. That's an entire disruption in society. So basically what happens is that you're going to have to take over the entire country, the railroads, everything, and get men to the front. And if you call mobilization, if Germany calls mobilization, what would its potential enemies do? They would mobilize too, won't they? Let's say two countries are mobilizing. Which one has the advantage? Mobilization, boom, they call it the trigger, boom, they're running. Which one has the advantage? Yeah, the faster one, the one who can mobilize first. Why? The first can attack before their enemy's ready. So mobilization now is a race. You start seeing by the 1890s, this hair trigger to train for mobilization to get the men to the front now. Take over everything and get the men to the front. And if you mobilize and don't attack, that allows your enemy to get the initiative. So mobilization means attack. But that's actually kind of scary, because if you don't mobilize, your enemy attacks. But mobilization is attack. Well, that means war. Politicians didn't really understand this. As they saw that we want to bully our enemy, let's threaten mobilization. When you mobilize, the generals all knew mobilization means we got to attack our enemy well. So they're on a hair trigger to attack. And so if something happens politically and politicians try to bully their potential political rivals, like Germany might try to bully Russia and vice versa. Russia might try to bully Austria, and they threaten mobilization. Well, everyone knows you mobilize, it's war, and they're all on a hair trigger. But now let's get to the next step. The youngest and brightest men, young men in Germany, through their secondary school, so they go through 13 years. They were going to be recruited to go to their military academy, especially math. Not to become mathematicians, for that matter, even officers, but to learn train techniques, to learn how to organize the mighty rail network of Germany, to take it over by the German army, there's mobilization, to get men from the interior to the front now, and all the supplies. How do you do that? That means economic control. If there's mobilization, the government takes over control. They take over the rail. Think about all the factories where all of a sudden you call up the reserves. That means how many men are going to be gone? All these men are going to be going to the front. The factories now, what's going to happen? The government's going to take it. Farms, government will take it. Now, it might not be like total control that people, like the government comes in and, like the police take over. But that's what happens. If there's mobilization, that means effective control of the entire economy by the army. And nobody realized what this meant. They made all these plans and it just sat there. And everybody's on a hair trigger to do this. Now let's look at Germany. There's Germany with 4.5 million men. France has a fantastic army, arguably almost if not as good, not as many men, 4 million. Russia, they have many more men. They're stuck at just under 6 million because they don't have enough equipment. But it's huge. We're talking almost 12 million men. What's Germany going to do? If Germany mobilizes to attack, who do they attack? If they split their army and attack both ways, they won't have enough. And they'll get crushed in what's soon going to be called a two-front war. In France. So what do? If they attack somebody weaker, what are their enemies doing? If Germany mobilizes, do you think France can't mobilize? France has got to mobilize if Germany mobilizes. What do you think the French plan is? To attack Germany. So they can't. If they mobilize and don't attack, they might get squashed in a very long war, which kind of would turn out that's what happened. What did they decide to do? Which is the bigger threat? AKA, which one can mobilize first? France or Russia? France. France. So that became their plan. Mobilize, attack France. That's their plan. Remember, mobilization means war. Mobilization first means you attack. So their plan was mobilize, attack France. Regardless of the reason for war. Mobilize, attack France. Gee, I wonder, think about that, a plan. You got a plan. What do you attack? The French are going to be right here. Their main force is to get back those lost provinces. Remember I told you about that yesterday? They're right here. If Germany attacks there, they'll get bogged down. And then here comes the Russians after they mobilize slowly. So where do you attack? You go around. You can't go through Switzerland. We already told you, there's Alps.
Belgium.
But who might that bring in war? They rolled the die. So their plan was to defeat the French, their huge army, in 5 to 6 weeks. Then put everybody on a train and go to Russia and defeat their army. So the entire, or all the countries of Europe are on a hair trigger. Germany mobilizes for whatever the reason they're attacking France without. French plan. What's the French plan? mobilize and attack here. Regardless. What's the Russian plan? The Russians have two mobilization plans. Either fully attack Austria or split. The Austrians have two plans. Either attack Russia or split into Serbia and Russia. Everybody has a plan. The British don't have a tiny army, so their plan is immediate naval blockade and hope for the big battle. They all have plans. Hair trigger. War, boom, they do it. They train and do it. Doesn't matter what the reason, they do it. Oh, does that sound familiar? So in 1993, the US planned for nuclear weapons. It's called SIRE. And their plan was nuclear war, regardless. Nuclear war. The president gives the codes to launch. The plan was to launch about 18,000 nuclear weapons against targets all over the Soviet Union and China and Eastern Europe, which would have meant the destruction of the world. That was the plan. There was no stalling. There was no plan to launch, okay, we'll just launch one missile. No, the plan was all out nuclear war. That was planned until 1993. It's an absolute miracle work. Because any of these events that are going to happen in the 60s and 70s and 80s that nearly led to war, if then one of those would have happened, we wouldn't have to worry about the APUSH. Well, that's one thing, huh? I'm really glad. We were always told there were more plans. It's quite the shock when you found out there weren't. Yeah, and they were jokingly making that point. So, if we're on a hair trigger right now, how fast could they fire all the nuclear weapons in the United States? How long would it take?
6 hours.
Not quite, but about 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. Every weapon on every submarine, all these missiles here, the missiles here, the missiles in Wyoming, the missiles in North Dakota, the missiles in South Dakota, and also scramble the bombers, and they'd all been off about 5 minutes. The world's gone. We're on as much of a hair trigger. And that's the scary thing about a hair trigger. What if it's true? Yeah.
Why are all the missiles on those are empty planes?
They have solid fuel. Solid fuel begins to degrade in humid climates. So you can't put them in Arkansas. Liquid fuel needs humidity, so they put the liquid fuel missiles we had, which were shockingly dangerous and iconic themselves. So the German plan was called the Schlieffen Plan after their chief of the great German general staff. I put G there, so it's called the infamous Schlieffen Plan. And the plan was to take originally 90% of the German army and basically don't even defend against the Russians or even the known French plan here and sweep through Belgium and Luxembourg. And if they resisted, knock them out. The plan was to be such a big right hook and sweep around here that the joke was the furthest man on the right, his sleeve will brush the channel, they'll sweep around Paris and they'll defeat the French army right there. That's the plan. And the French plan seemed to work pretty well on this. The French plan was creatively called Plan 17. And the plan was to invade into right here, into Alsace-Lorraine. So while the French go here, the Germans are sweeping around. So the Germans planned and planned and planned this. How many men do we keep in the East? What do we do? One big problem with this, the Germans realized by 1910, 1909, actually, they won't work. There's absolutely no way the Schlieffen Plan will work. You're asking too much of the men to fight to defeat the French and then go defeat the Russians. They got there's not enough roads. There'll be nothing but a traffic jam. It will not work. But that's their plan. So when the war began in 1914, Schlieffen Plan, worldwide war. That's their plan. That's all they have. So the whole point is everybody's on a hair trigger. And that leads to now the causes of the war. The Balkan crisis. What was the umbrella ethnic group that wanted to, Slavs, who wanted nationalism? Here's the Balkan Peninsula. Remember Serbia, Austria? There's all this intrigue. Well, they used to call it the Balkans powder keg. In fact, and don't forget, Serbia is drumming up trouble in Austria. And that goes back to 1878. And that are the great powers trying to tamp down crisis in the Balkans way back then. There were two wars in 1912 and 1913 in the Balkans that nearly led to full-scale war. Somehow, Armageddon was avoided. But Serbia is still intriguing here, and they had a very decadent monarchy. It was seen as just this almost a pariah state. I mean, the current king of Serbia took power by pushing the previous king out a window onto an iron a chain or an iron fence where he was impaled. By the way, anybody know what that's called? If you push somebody out a window? Defenestration, yes. Use that to pressure friends. So, remember those Slavic nationalism. And don't forget, there are still anarchist attacks all over. Everyone's thinking it's going to be some kind of class war. Well, something totally unexpected would happen. There's all these assassinations already. But then the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was the heir to the Austrian throne. And he would be murdered on June 28th, 1914. He and his wife. What's called a Morganic American. Couldn't be. But the assassination. So remember, Serbia was intriguing in Austria. And Archduke Franz Ferdinand, his great uncle was Franz Joseph, the Kaiser of Austria, who had been Kaiser since 1848. And he was kind of a reformer. He actually wanted to give the Slavs a little bit more independence. And that was seen as a threat. Serbia wanted them to crack down on the Slavs. So they decided to have an assassination attempt. He was going to be in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, which is a province in Austria, now an independent country. There was going to be a military review, and he would go through Sarajevo. And they decided to attempt an assassination. Oh, there's Franz Joseph. And Franz Joseph was an old-time conservative who wanted his empire. I forgot to put the picture of Franz Joseph. He hated his nephew, despised him. And he would live till 1916. But I'm sorry this got covered up. The Serbians created a Slavic group in Bosnia called the Black Hand. That's a popular name. There's also used for organized crime. And they were Slavic nationalists. Basically this. It's real easy marking to intimidate your enemies. You dip your hand in black paint, then leave a handprint. So there were these, basically, there were gangsters in like New Orleans who were black-handed. And so they did the same thing. So sometimes you might see the black-handers, if you ever heard that in the United States, they were just gangsters. They would go to little merchants and put the symbol of the black hand and say, give us money or we'll burn down your store. But these were Slavic nationalists. And they recruited the Serbians recruited this group, and they found assassins. And all of them had tuberculosis. And that was done on purpose. And one we need to know is the Serbian secret police did it, but his name was Gavrilo Princip. Princip wanted to join the Serbian army, even though he was a Bosnian, but he was too small and too young. He had to wait. But why tuberculosis? They had death sentences on them already. And so the thought was, if they're already condemned to die of tuberculosis, they will be less likely to give up the Serbian police. So they picked men that were already condemned to die. And they're going to be waiting in Sarajevo when Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes through. They were all given a pistol, an old style grenade where they would kind of pull a cord and it would actually literally, that pulling of it would light a match and start a fuse, and then so it would smoke. Old grenade, not like a modern one. And a little glass vial of cyanide that they're supposed to kill themselves. A little glass vial with a cork. So we're going to go assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And that's in Sarajevo. Don't worry about the names, but these numbers are where they were waiting. The Archduke was going to come in a procession. There were war games outside, come through. He turned down guards because they were still dressed in their combat uniforms and they weren't properly attired. So he didn't have very many guards. He was in a car. That's them right after the first attempt. They're going to drive through the courthouse, drive back, go and out of town. And then a little procession down the Mijak River on the Apple Way. And there were the assassins. When they drove through, the first assassin hesitated, the car was already gone. The second assassin pulled out the grenade and threw it, but the driver could see the smoke and sped up, and it bounced off the back of this car, exploded underneath a car following it, wounding 2 officers. Well, that was it. The driver correctly realized assassination. And remember, there are assassination attacks all over, so they knew about this. They hit the gas and went past all the rest of the assassins, who immediately just started fleeing. A couple were caught trying to escape across the river. A few of them were captured to try to fight the glass to get to the cyanide, but the corks all leaked and it was too old and they just got really sick. Princey, who was here, crossed the street and entered a delicatessen and got a sandwich. He tried to act natural. So naturally, when there was an assassination attempt, you're hungry. So he went and got a sandwich and so, to try to hide. Well, the Archduke got to the courthouse, yelled at the mayor, how dare you not have security, and then jumped in the car. And he said, they tried to get him to go a totally different way. Yeah. But he wanted to go to the hospital with the 2 officers who were hurt. So instead of going here, the plan was just to drive all the way back this way. But the driver in front of the Archduke's car didn't know that the plans had changed. So what did he do? He got here and turned. The Archduke's car followed and turned. The driver realized it, slammed on the brakes right in front of that delicatessen where Princey went got a sandwich. He was walking out, and all of a sudden, the Archduke's car was right in front of him. There he was. So what did he do? Didn't think about it, pulled out his black powder pistol and just pulled it. And that's how Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Black were killed. If they would have kept going straight, totally different course of history. I'm not kidding, everything would be different. And so here's a cartoon version of this, in case you weren't clear, it wasn't clear. Okay. See, come back. Up, back up, bang. One more time. How do you know which car is the Archduke's? The cool mustache, huh? Aren't you glad for this graphic representation of it? Okay, I thought this was very amusing, and I didn't want to be alone. Yeah.
So the world went to war because a Serbian killed an Austrian in Bosnia.
Naturally, yeah. So 15 million people will die, of course. So that's a picture of the assassination. This is Princey right after the assassination. He was immediately grabbed by the police, and they did a big show trial. And he was too young to be executed under Austrian law, so they held off the sentence until for 2 years, and so they could make a big show execution of it. But he would eventually die of tuberculosis in 1980, before the war ended. He finally died of this disease. And so all over Europe began a series of anti-Serbian, anti-Slavic reprisals. And here is our Serbian car or Slavic carts overturned in Vienna. Here's a trial of Princip and others. Here is a mass execution of Slavs that are, remember I told you about garroting? Remember that slow strangulation? That's a garroting machine here too. Where they have a little ratchet, you flip the ratchet and hold them up and then let them paint them. And then slowly go out. Sometimes they do it with piano walking, which would cut their head. Tear. This was meant to tear. How were the nationalists who wanted Slavic independence? How did they react to this crackdown? They were so happy. That's what they wanted. The Slavic nationalists wanted the Austrians to start killing Slavs. So then they could say, look how awful they are, and we have to revolt. Now, memories are a wonderful thing. Let's see if we can remember way back to September. Wasn't there a situation like this where there was a big attack? Maybe they dressed them as Mohawk Indians. They rode out to a boat and threw tea overboard. Do you remember that? And the British responded with the coercive acts. And the Patriots were like, yes, we told you they were tyrants, and this proves it. On that note, I have to tie my shoe. I'm losing my mind. Let me finish this real quick. So, Serbia, the problem was. Huh?
See, I.
Oh, that's what I'm seeing. Boy, they've been doing horribly, aren't they? So, here's the thing. When they captured all these attempted assassins, they had pistols, grenades that you trace back to the Serbian secret police. And a few of them still had their papers from crossing the border from Serbia to Austria. The Serbian secret police was behind it, and everyone in the world knew about it. And Serbia became an international pariah all over the world. And so here we have assassination might lead the war, and everyone's just panicking. And here is a cartoon, very German cartoon, of all the great powers, and nobody wants to sit next to Serbia. I'm not going to tell you what he's doing. I think you can figure it out. But the point is, he offends them. That's a very German style of humor. Yeah, you can figure it out. And if you can't, good for you. But the July crisis would soon begin. And what happened was this. There was an expectation that Austria is going to punish Serbia. And it's going to kill people, but like an attack over the border. The border of Austria and Serbia was the Danube River. And Belgrade is just across the border. And many people thought Austria might just shell Serbia, do something like that. But a punitive attack to punish them. And in fact, even Russia was furious at Serbia. And there's a cartoon from Austria in July to do something about Serbia. But Austria looked at this as an opportunity. What if we use this assassination to not just punish Serbia, but to knock them out, to destroy it, to get rid of the threat of Serbian and Slavic nationalism once and for all? So they decided a full invasion. Full invasion, knock them out. But here's the problem. They have a full invasion. What about Russia? Might Russia intervene? So going into July, they're making these secret, deep moves inside Vienna. And then they thought, what about Russia? Well, who's Austria's ally? Who? Germany. So they go to Germany and they go to Kaiser and his chancellor, Bethlen Guggen, and they basically ask, will you back us up if we attack Serbia? And Germany said, whatever you do, we'll back you up. And this will be known in history as the blank check. Do what you want. Now, basically, what Germany's thinking is a short attack on Serbia. They kind of hid, at least from the Kaiser, that it's full-scale war. Well, actually, this is going on through the middle of July. People around the world worried about war right away. A picture of the assassination. They're like, we dodged the bullet. Maybe there won't be war. Because nobody knows what's happening in Vienna and Austria. Let me get one more down. But the chief of the German general staff, this man right here, Paul von Moltke, he told the Austrians, go all out. In fact, Kaiser had no idea he did it. The German, and why is von Moltke saying do it now? We'll never have a better time to knock the Russians. Every day we wait, Russia gets stronger. Let's knock them out now. This should remind you of something. This is the exact same thinking of the Confederacy, or in the South, when they formed the Confederacy and seceded. We'll never have a better chance than now. Which is scary. If you're looking for any one single person that's most responsible for the war, it's between him and the Kaiser. Thank you, my good man. Get a couple of right. Thank you. No, I'm good. I have to. No, I never did. Oh. Yeah, that's always a problem, you know, if they don't take my class.
Oh, yeah, because like he was a senior.
Can I still come see you guys take my exam? Is it wide open?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you, you're just gonna come down and? Let me think. Yeah, so bring your laptop and a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I'll have to put you in the hallway.
Is the testing teams the full test or no?